Lian was the kind of princess who got lost in the crowd. Not literally, of course, although with the sprawling chaos of the imperial palace, it was surprisingly easy to do. No, Lian was lost in the metaphorical crowd, a pale shadow amidst the vibrant tapestry of court life. She was the emperor's seventh daughter, born to a concubine whose favor had faded faster than cherry blossoms in a spring storm. She was, to put it bluntly, insignificant. Her existence was a peculiar blend of invisibility and inconvenience. At court functions, she was the girl no one remembered to introduce, the one who always ended up with the wilted flower arrangement and the seat with the wobbly leg. Her half-siblings, the offspring of more favored concubines, and the empress herself, treated her with a mixture of disdain and amusement. "Oh, look! It's little Lian," Princess Maylene would sneer, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. "Did you get lost on your way to the kitchens? They might have some scraps for you there." And Lian, a slender girl of 12 with eyes that held the wisdom of someone far older, would simply incline her head, a flicker of defiance in their depths. She knew her place, or rather her lack of place. She was a footnote in the annals of the imperial family, a minor inconvenience to be tolerated, not celebrated. Even the emperor, her own father, barely acknowledged her existence. He was a man consumed by the burdens of ruling a vast empire, his mind occupied with matters of war and diplomacy, his affections distributed amongst his numerous wives and children, according to their political value and their mother's current standing. Lian, with her mother's fall from grace, had become as irrelevant as a last year's mooncake. "Lian? Yes, Lian," the emperor would say, his brow furrowed in an effort to recall her name. "You are growing taller, are you not?" And Lian, yearning for a genuine smile, a word of encouragement, a flicker of paternal affection, would simply nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. Her days were a monotonous routine of calligraphy lessons, embroidery practice, and tedious hours spent attending to her mother, whose health had declined along with her status. She was often tasked with menial chores, fetching tea for the empress, sorting through old scrolls in the dusty archives, even helping the kitchen staff with the preparation of the endless banquets that fueled the court's extravagant lifestyle. But Lian was no fool. Beneath her quiet exterior, a sharp mind observed the intricate workings of the court. She saw the power struggles, the betrayals, the simmering discontent beneath the surface of opulent ceremonies and lavish displays of wealth. She listened to the whispers in the corridors, the gossip exchanged behind silk fans and jeweled hairpins, the secrets that could make or break empires. And in the solitude of her small, neglected chamber, she read history books, philosophy scrolls, even forbidden texts on military strategy and the art of war. She was a seed planted in barren soil, her potential stunted by neglect and indifference. But within her, a spark of resilience flickered. A quiet determination to survive, to thrive, to prove them all wrong. She was Lian, the forgotten princess, the overlooked daughter, the insignificant footnote in the grand narrative of the empire. But one day, they would all learn to remember her name. The war with the Xiongnu came like a sudden squall, disrupting the languid rhythm of the imperial court. The northern borders, once secure, were now overrun by fierce horsemen who swept across the plains, leaving a trail of burning villages and terrified refugees in their wake. The emperor, his arrogance shaken, his army stretched thin, found himself in a desperate situation. The court, a hive of whispers and anxieties, buzzed with frantic activity. Generals argued over strategy, ministers debated the merits of appeasement versus defiance, and the concubines, their painted smiles faltering, fretted over the safety of their sons. Lian, as always, remained on the periphery, an unnoticed observer in the unfolding drama. Then came the summons, not to the emperor's grand council chamber, where matters of war and peace were usually decided, but to a small, dimly lit room where the empress, her face pale and drawn, awaited her. "Lian," the empress began, her voice devoid of its usual imperiousness, "the emperor has a task for you?" Lian, her heart sinking, simply nodded. She knew what was coming. She had seen it in the panicked whispers of the courtiers, in the averted gazes of her half-siblings, in the cold calculation in her father's eyes when he had finally deigned to acknowledge her presence. "The Xiongnu," the empress continued, her voice faltering, "they have requested a peace offering. A A princess. Leon's breath caught in her throat. A princess. A disposable princess. A forgotten princess. And and who will be this offering? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Empress, her eyes filled with a flicker of something that might have been pity, reached out and gently touched Leon's cheek. You, my dear, she said, her voice soft, you will be the one to secure peace for our empire. Leon, her mind reeling, could only nod dumbly. She had expected this, dreaded it, yet a part of her still clung to a sliver of hope, a foolish belief that perhaps, just perhaps, she might be spared. But the court, in its desperation, had chosen the easiest solution, the most expendable sacrifice. As she was being prepared for her journey to the Xiongnu camp, a figure slipped into her chambers. It was Prince Jian, her younger half-brother, the only one who had ever shown her a shred of kindness. Lian, he said, his voice filled with a concern that warmed her heart. I'm so sorry. Lian, surprised by his unexpected visit, managed a weak smile. It's all right, Jian, she said, her voice trembling. It's not your fault. Jian, his eyes filled with a helpless anger, shook his head. It's not right, Lian. They're using you, discarding you like a broken toy. Lian, touched by his empathy, reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, Jian, she whispered. Your kindness. It means more than you know. Jian, his face pale, leaned forward and embraced her, a brief, awkward hug that conveyed more affection than she had ever received from her family. Be safe, Lian, he whispered. Come back to us. Lian, clinging to his words, nodded. She knew the odds were stacked against her, that her journey was likely a one-way trip to a brutal and uncertain fate. But Jian's kindness, his unexpected show of support, gave her a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance that would fuel her in the dark days to come. As she was escorted out of the palace, her head held high, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, Lian made a silent vow. She would not be a victim. She would not be a pawn. She would not be forgotten. She would survive, and one day she would return, not as a princess, but as a force to be reckoned with. The journey to the Xiongnu camp was a blur of endless plains, biting winds, and the ever-present fear gnawing at Leon's heart. She was escorted by a small contingent of Imperial guards, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. They saw her as a sacrificial lamb, a pawn to be discarded in a desperate political game. Lian, however, saw herself as something else, a survivor. When they finally arrived at the Xiongnu camp, the sight that greeted them was a stark contrast to the gilded cages of the Imperial Palace. Rough tents stretched across the plains, smoke rising from campfires, the air filled with the sounds of horses neighing and men shouting in a language Lian didn't understand. Warriors, clad in leather and fur, their faces hardened by battle, eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Lian, stepping out of the carriage, her silk robes incongruous against the harsh landscape, met their gazes with a quiet defiance. She had expected fear, perhaps even contempt, but she saw something else in their eyes, a grudging respect for her courage, for her willingness to face the unknown. The Xiongnu chieftain, a towering figure with a scarred face and piercing eyes, greeted her with a curt nod. You are the Emperor's offering? He asked, his voice rough, his words translated by a nervous interpreter. I am Princess Lian, she replied, her voice clear and steady, sent to negotiate peace between our peoples. The chieftain grunted, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. He had expected a pampered princess, a delicate flower wilting in the face of hardship. Instead, he saw a girl with a spine of steel, her eyes burning with an inner fire that belied her fragile appearance. You are not what we expected, he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. Lian, her chin held high, met his gaze. I am more than you expect, she said, her voice laced with a quiet confidence. The chieftain, intrigued, gestured towards a nearby tent. Come, he said. We will discuss the terms of your surrender. Lian, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering, followed him. She knew she was walking into the lion's den, that her fate hung precariously in the balance. But she also knew that this was her chance, her opportunity to prove her worth, to forge her own destiny. She was no longer a princess, a pawn in a political game. She was Lian, a survivor, a warrior in the making, and she would not go down without a fight. Life in the Xiongnu camp was a far cry from the pampered existence Lian had known in the imperial palace. Gone were the silk robes, the elaborate hairstyles, and the endless banquets. Instead, she wore rough-spun clothes, her hair braided tightly, her meals consisting of whatever meager rations the camp could provide. The Xiongnu warriors, hardened by a lifetime of nomadic living and constant warfare, treated her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. They were intrigued by her, this delicate princess who had been thrust into their harsh world, but they also saw her as a symbol of the decadent empire they despised. Lian, however, refused to be intimidated. She observed their customs, their training regimens, their strategies. She listened to their tales of battle, their songs of victory and loss, their conversations about the weaknesses of the empire she had once called home. She was particularly drawn to General Wei, the chieftain's most trusted advisor and a warrior of legendary reputation. Wei was a man of few words, his face etched with the scars of countless battles, his eyes as sharp and cold as the winter winds that swept across the plains. He regarded Lian with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, his gaze lingering on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Why are you here, princess?" he asked one day, his voice gruff, his words translated by the ever-present interpreter. "I was sent as an offering of peace," Lian replied, her voice steady, her gaze meeting his without flinching. Wei snorted. "Peace? Your empire knows only how to wage war. They send you, a fragile princess, as a token of their weakness, their desperation." Lian bristled at his words, but she also recognized the truth in them. "Perhaps," she said, her voice laced with a quiet defiance, "but I am not here to be a token. I am here to learn." Wei's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Learn? What could you possibly learn from us?" "To fight," Lian said, her voice firm, her eyes burning with a newfound determination. "To survive. To become strong." Wei, intrigued by her unexpected response, studied her for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a rare sight that transformed his harsh features. "Very well, princess," he said, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. "Let us see what you are made of." And so, Lian's training began. She learned to ride, to shoot arrows, to wield a sword. She endured grueling physical exercises, pushing her body to its limits, her determination fueled by a desire to prove herself, to survive, to become more than just a forgotten princess. She was still an outsider, an anomaly in their world. But with each passing day, with each challenge she overcame, she earned a grudging respect from the Xiongnu warriors. And in General Wei, she found a mentor, a challenger, and perhaps something more. Lian's training was nothing short of brutal. The Xiongnu warriors, accustomed to a life of hardship and constant warfare, showed no mercy to the delicate princess. They pushed her to the very limits of her endurance, their gruff commands and harsh criticisms echoing across the training grounds. "Faster, princess!" a warrior barked as Lian struggled to keep pace during a grueling run across the rugged terrain. "You run like a newborn calf." "Again!" another shouted as she fumbled with her sword, the unfamiliar weight awkward in her hands. "You fight like a drunken scholar!" Lian's body ached, her muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to give up. She gritted her teeth, pushed through the pain, and repeated the exercises until her movements became fluid, her strikes precise, her endurance seemingly limitless. She had a fire in her belly, a fierce determination to prove herself, to earn their respect, to become one of them. And slowly, she did. The warriors, initially skeptical, began to acknowledge her resilience, her unwavering spirit. They saw the princess shed her fragility like a winter coat, revealing a core of steel beneath. They saw her learn their language, their customs, their way of life. They saw her fight alongside them, her sword a blur of motion, her cries echoing their own as they sparred under the watchful eyes of General Wei. Wei, initially cold and distant, found himself increasingly drawn to the princess. He watched her train, her determination burning bright in her eyes, her movements growing more fluid and powerful with each passing day. He saw the intelligence in her gaze, the quickness with which she grasped new concepts, the strategic mind that lay hidden beneath her quiet exterior. He began to seek her out, offering her advice, challenging her to push harder, to think deeper. He taught her the intricacies of Xiongnu warfare, the tactics and strategies honed over generations of conflict. He shared with her his own experiences on the battlefield, the lessons he had learned, the sacrifices he had made. War is not just about strength, princess, he said one evening as they sat by the campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. It is about cunning, about strategy, about knowing your enemy and yourself. Lian, her eyes fixed on his, listened intently. She had come to respect Wei, not just as a warrior, but as a leader, a man of wisdom and insight. She saw the burden of responsibility he carried, the weight of his people's expectations, the loneliness of command. And as they talked, sharing stories and strategies, a spark ignited between them, a connection that transcended their different worlds, their opposing loyalties. It was a dangerous attraction, forbidden and fraught with complications, but it was also undeniable. One night, after a particularly grueling training session, Wei found Lian tending to her wounds by the flickering light of a lantern. He knelt beside her, his rough hands gently examining the cuts and bruises that marred her delicate skin. "You are strong, princess," he said, his voice low and husky, his gaze lingering on her face. Lian, her heart pounding, met his eyes. "I am learning to be," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Wei's hand reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "You are more than just a princess, Lian," he said, his voice filled with a meaning that went beyond words. Lian, her breath catching in her throat, leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as she surrendered to the moment, the forbidden attraction, the dangerous possibility of something more. The revelation came like a lightning strike, shattering the fragile peace that had settled between Lian and Wei. It was during a moonless night, the wind howling through the Xiongnu camp, that Wei sought her out, his face etched with a grim determination she had never seen before. "Lian," he began, his voice low and urgent, "there is something you must know." Lian, her heart pounding with a premonition of something momentous, simply nodded, her eyes fixed on his. "I am not who you think I am," Wei continued, his voice heavy with unspoken burdens. "I am not just a general. I am the prince." Lian's breath hitched. The prince? The heir to the Xiongnu throne? The enemy of her people? The realization struck her like a physical blow, leaving her reeling. "But how?" she stammered, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of his words. Wei, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, recounted his story. He had been sent away as a child, hidden among the nomadic tribes, to protect him from the political machinations of the Xiongnu court. He had grown up as a warrior, earning his place through skill and cunning, his true identity known only to a select few. "I was to return when the time was right," he said, his voice laced with a bitterness that surprised Lian. "To claim my birthright, to lead my people to war against your empire." Lian, her mind still reeling, felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. Betrayal, confusion, anger, and a strange sense of understanding. She had been a pawn in her own empire's game, discarded and forgotten. Wei, it seemed, had been a pawn in his own way, his life shaped by forces beyond his control. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Wei turned to her, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability that she had never seen before. "Because I trust you, Lian," he said, his voice husky. Because I need you to understand." He stepped closer, his hands reaching out to cup her face, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "Because I care for you, Lian. More than I should." Lian, her heart pounding, met his gaze. The truth of his words resonated within her, echoing the feelings she had been trying to suppress, to deny. But the reality of their situation, the chasm that separated their worlds, their loyalties, their destinies, loomed between them like an insurmountable barrier. "Wei," she began, her voice trembling. We can't." "I know," he said, his voice laced with a painful understanding. "But I cannot deny what I feel, Lian. Nor can I deny who I am." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both tender and desperate, a fleeting moment of connection in a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. The tension between them crackled in the air, the pull of their forbidden attraction warring with the political realities that threatened to consume them. Lian, torn between her loyalty to her homeland and her growing feelings for Wei, found herself at a crossroads, a dangerous precipice where one wrong step could shatter everything she had fought for, everything she had come to believe in. Lian's transformation was complete. The delicate princess was gone, replaced by a fierce warrior, a cunning strategist, a leader who commanded respect and inspired loyalty. She had learned the Xiongnu ways, their brutal efficiency, their unwavering commitment to victory. She mastered their style of warfare, adapting it with her own insights, creating tactics that were both innovative and devastatingly effective. Her successes on the battlefield became legendary. She led raiding parties that crippled imperial supply lines, orchestrated ambushes that decimated enemy patrols, and devised siege strategies that brought even the most fortified cities to their knees. Her name, once synonymous with weakness and insignificance, was now whispered in awe and fear, the god of war. One particular victory cemented her reputation. A large imperial army, confident in their superior numbers, had cornered a smaller Xiongnu force, trapping them in a narrow mountain pass. The imperial generals, certain of their victory, prepared to deliver the final blow. Lian, however, saw an opportunity where others saw only defeat. She divided her forces, sending a small contingent to scale the treacherous cliffs overlooking the pass, while she led the main force in a feigned retreat, drawing the imperial army deeper into the trap. At her signal, the hidden warriors unleashed a barrage of arrows and rocks from above, creating chaos and confusion in the enemy ranks. Lian then turned her own forces, attacking the imperial army from both sides, crushing them in a devastating pincer movement. The battle was a massacre. The imperial army, caught completely off guard, was routed, their losses staggering. Lian's victory was decisive, a testament to her strategic brilliance and her unwavering courage. News of her triumph spread across the land, bolstering the Xiongnu's morale and striking fear into the hearts of the imperial court. Meanwhile, within the gilded cage of the imperial palace, Prince Jian, Lian's younger half-brother, was playing his own game of war. He had never forgotten Lian, never forgiven his family for their callous sacrifice. He had watched her go, knowing that she was likely walking to her death, and a seed of resentment had begun to fester within him. While the court celebrated their supposed victory over the Xiongnu, news of Lian's successes conveniently downplayed or attributed to luck, Jian quietly observed the growing rot within the empire. The emperor, paranoid and increasingly erratic, saw enemies everywhere, his decisions driven by fear and suspicion rather than reason. The ministers, greedy and corrupt, enriched themselves at the expense of the people, their coffers overflowing while the kingdom suffered. Jian, using his position as a prince, subtly gathered information, cultivating alliances with those who shared his discontent. He spoke to disgruntled generals, disillusioned officials, and even some of the palace guards, planting seeds of rebellion, whispering of a better future, a future where justice and compassion would prevail. He was careful, methodical, playing a long game. He knew that open defiance would be suicide. He needed to build his support base, to gather evidence of the court's corruption, to wait for the opportune moment to strike. He knew that his sister, somewhere beyond the borders, was fighting her own battles, forging her own destiny. And he believed that one day she would return. And when she did, he would be ready. He would be waiting. He would be her ally. Or so he hoped. He knew the woman returning would be very different from the sister he remembered. He just hoped she wouldn't see him as another enemy to be conquered. The summons came at dawn, carried by a dust-covered rider who had ridden through the night. Wei, his face grim, read the message, the parchment crackling in his calloused hands. His father, the Xiongnu emperor, was ailing. His presence was required, not as a general, but as the heir to the throne. He found Lian practicing her swordsmanship, her movements a blur of controlled fury, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had blossomed in the harsh landscape of the steppes, the fire in her spirit burning brighter than ever before. Wei's heart ached at the thought of leaving her, of the chasm that was about to open between them. "Lian," he began, his voice heavy, "I have received news." She stopped her practice, her eyes sharp and perceptive, sensing the gravity of his tone. "What is it, Wei?" He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. How could he explain the impossible choice he faced, the conflict tearing him apart? My father, he is ill, he finally managed, the words inadequate, pale shadows of the truth. I must return. Leon's expression softened with concern. I'm sorry to hear that way. Is there anything I can do? He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You've already done too much, Princess. You've shown me what it means to be truly alive, to fight for something more than just duty, to love. He stepped closer, his gaze locking with hers, the intensity of his emotions burning in his eyes. Leon, he began, then stopped, the words failing him. How could he confess his love for the enemy, the woman who was destined to stand against his people, against his own birthright? Leon, sensing his turmoil, reached out, her hand gently touching his arm. Wei, what is it? What are you not saying? He took a deep breath, the decision made, the truth demanding to be spoken. Leon, I am not just a general. I am the Xiongnu prince. The shock on her face mirrored the turmoil in his own soul. He watched as understanding dawned in her eyes, the realization of the impossible situation they were in. I was sent away as a child, he explained, his voice low and urgent, hidden to protect me from those who sought to usurp the throne. I was to return one day to claim my birthright, to lead my people against yours. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the same battle raging within her that raged within him. He knew what she was thinking, the question swirling in her mind. Why? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why tell me this? Why now? Because I cannot lie to you, Leon, he said, his voice raw with emotion. Because I love you? He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks, memorizing every detail, every curve, every freckle. I love you, Leon, he repeated, his voice firm this time, the declaration echoing in the silence of the tent. And I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, of fighting against you, of losing you. He saw the tears welling up in her eyes, the conflict tearing her apart. He knew he was asking the impossible, demanding a choice that defied logic, that betrayed everything she had ever known. Wei, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know what to say. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the cold night air. You don't have to say anything, Leon, he said, his voice soft. Just choose. Choose me. Choose us. Choose a future where we can be together, where our empires can coexist in peace. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, pleading for a glimmer of hope, a sign that their love could transcend the boundaries of war and duty. The choice was hers, the fate of their empires, their love, their very lives, hung in the balance. The whispers started long before she crossed the border. They were carried on the wind, tales of a fearsome warrior, a woman of unparalleled skill and cunning, a leader who commanded armies and toppled kingdoms. They called her the God of War, a name that inspired both awe and terror. And then she was at the gates. Leon's return was not a quiet homecoming. It was a spectacle, a display of power that shook the very foundations of the empire. She arrived at the head of a formidable army, Xiongnu warriors and loyal allies marching alongside her, a sea of steel and leather that stretched as far as the eye could see. Her banners, emblazoned with a stylized phoenix rising from ashes, snapped in the wind, a symbol of her rebirth, her transformation, her unwavering resolve. The imperial capital, once a bustling hub of commerce and intrigue, was now a city gripped by fear. The emperor, paranoid and delusional, had fortified the palace, surrounding himself with guards who were more afraid of him than they were of the approaching army. The court, once a hotbed of gossip and ambition, was now a scene of panic and desperation. The whispers had become screams, the smiles replaced by faces etched with terror. Leon, clad in battle armor, her face hidden behind a mask of cold determination, rode at the forefront of her army. She stopped before the city gates, her gaze fixed on the towering walls that had once symbolized the impenetrable power of her family. Now they were just obstacles, barriers to be overcome. She raised her hand, and the army halted. a silent, disciplined force that radiated an aura of overwhelming power. A single rider detached from the ranks and approached the city gates, carrying a white flag. "Open the gates!" the rider called out, his voice amplified by a mystical force that carried across the vast distance, echoing through the city streets. "In the name of the god of war, I demand entry." The gates remained closed. The guards, their faces pale, their hands trembling, clung to their weapons, their fear overriding their duty. Lian, her patience wearing thin, lowered her hand. "Prepare for siege," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. The army moved with practiced efficiency, setting up their siege engines, preparing for the assault. The city, bracing for the inevitable, held its breath. Before the first stone could be launched, however, a commotion erupted within the city walls. A group of soldiers, their faces determined, their weapons drawn, stormed the gate, overwhelming the terrified guards. The gate swung open, revealing a figure standing in the gateway, a familiar face that made Lian's heart skip a beat. It was Jun, her younger half-brother, his face pale but resolute. He had kept his promise. He had waited for her return. "Lian," he said, his voice carrying across the distance, "welcome home." Lian, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude, urged her horse forward. She rode through the open gates, her army following behind her, their banners waving, their footsteps echoing through the deserted streets. She found her family in the throne room, huddled together like frightened animals. The emperor, his eyes wild, his hair disheveled, sat on his throne, a hollow shell of his former self. The queen, her beauty faded, her face etched with fear, clung to his arm. Her siblings, their arrogance replaced by terror, huddled together, their eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Lian stopped before them, her gaze sweeping over their faces, taking in their fear, their desperation, their shame. "Father," she said, her voice cold and hard. "Mother? Siblings?" The emperor, recognizing the voice, looked up, his eyes widening in horror. "Lian?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Lian's lips curled into a chilling smile. "I have returned," she said, her voice laced with a quiet menace. "And I have come to claim what is rightfully mine." Lian didn't waste time on gloating. The throne room, with its terrified occupants, held little interest for her. She had bigger concerns, securing the capital, consolidating her power, and preparing for the inevitable backlash from those who clung to the old regime. Her first order of business was to address the city. She rode through the streets, her Xiongnu warriors flanking her, their presence a stark reminder of the empire's vulnerability. The people, initially hesitant, emerged from their homes, their eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. They had heard the whispers, the legends of the god of war. But seeing her in person, a young woman with a commanding presence and an aura of undeniable power, was something else entirely. Lian, sensing their uncertainty, addressed them in a clear, confident voice that resonated through the square. "People of the imperial city," she announced, "I am Lian, your rightful empress. I have returned to reclaim the throne that was stolen from me, to restore order to our troubled land, to bring peace and prosperity to our people." She spoke of the corruption that had plagued the court, the injustices that had been inflicted upon the common folk, the weakness that had allowed the Xiongnu to encroach upon their borders. She promised change, reform, a new era of justice and strength. Her words, delivered with a conviction that resonated with their own grievances, stirred a flicker of hope in the hearts of the people. They had suffered under the old regime, and the prospect of a new leader, a warrior who had proven her strength and her determination, was a welcome change. Lian, sensing their shifting mood, pressed her advantage. She ordered the release of political prisoners, those who had been unjustly imprisoned by the emperor's paranoia. She announced a reduction in taxes, a gesture of goodwill that earned her the immediate support of the merchants and traders. And she publicly executed several corrupt officials, a display of ruthlessness that sent a clear message to those who might be tempted to resist her rule. Within days, the city was firmly under her control. The remaining loyalists to the old regime, seeing the writing on the wall, either surrendered or fled. Lian, with Jian's help, began the task of purging the court, replacing corrupt officials with those who were loyal and competent. She also sent envoys to the Xiongnu, assuring them of her peaceful intentions, proposing a treaty that would secure the borders and allow for trade and cultural exchange. She knew that peace with the Xiongnu was essential if she was to rebuild the empire, to heal the wounds of war, to create a lasting legacy. But Lian was not naive. She knew that her ascension to the throne would not be universally welcomed. There were those who still clung to the old ways, who saw her as a usurper, a traitor who had consorted with the enemy. She knew that she would need to be vigilant, to be prepared for any challenge, any threat to her newfound power. And so, while she worked to secure peace and rebuild her empire, she also made preparations for war. She strengthened the army, training new recruits, forging alliances with neighboring kingdoms, and stockpiling weapons and supplies. She knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, that there would be battles to be fought, sacrifices to be made. But she was ready. She was Lian, the god of war, the empress of the Phoenix, and she would not rest until her empire was secure, her people prosperous, and her legacy enshrined in the annals of history. Lian had underestimated her brother. She had always known Jian was kind, a rare flicker of warmth in the cold hearth of their family, but she had dismissed him as naive, too gentle for the cutthroat world of the imperial court. Now, as she sat in the council chambers, surrounded by maps and reports detailing a network of informants and sympathizers throughout the empire, she realized the depth of his quiet rebellion. This is extensive, she said, her voice laced with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. How did you manage this? Jian, seated across from her, a faint smile playing on his lips, shrugged. It wasn't easy, sister. Years of careful whispers, of cultivating alliances, of exploiting the cracks in the old regime's foundation. He recounted his efforts, the risks he had taken, the allies he had gathered. He had infiltrated the ranks of the palace guards, secured the support of several influential ministers, and even established contact with sympathetic nobles in the outer provinces. He had been working in the shadows, patiently waiting for the moment to strike, the moment that had arrived with Lian's return. Lian, listening to his account, felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. Gratitude for his unwavering loyalty, his belief in her even when she had been discarded and forgotten. Shame for her own underestimation of him, her blindness to his strength and his cunning, and a renewed sense of purpose, a realization that she was not alone in this fight, that she had a powerful ally in her own blood. Jian, she began, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know what to say. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face, erasing the years of weariness and worry. You don't have to say anything, sister. I did it for you, for our people, for the empire we both believe in. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, his voice filled with a quiet determination. But I need your help, Lian. The court is still riddled with those who cling to the old ways, who see you as a usurper, a threat to their power. We need to root them out, to expose their treachery, to secure your reign. Lian, her resolve hardening, nodded. You are right, Jian. We cannot afford to be complacent. We need to act swiftly, decisively, to eliminate any threat to our new order. She spent the next few days poring over the information Jian had gathered, studying the names, the connections, the evidence of corruption and treachery. She summoned her most trusted advisors, including General Wei, who had returned to her side after a brief but agonizing separation, his loyalty to her overriding his duty to his own empire. Together they devised a plan, a carefully orchestrated series of arrests and public trials that would expose the remaining loyalists to the old regime and solidify Lian's hold on power. They would use the evidence Jian had gathered to dismantle their networks, to turn their own allies against them, to discredit them in the eyes of the people. We need to be swift, Your Majesty, Wei advised, his voice grave. Any hesitation, any sign of weakness could embolden our enemies and undermine your authority. Lian, her gaze fixed on the map of the empire, nodded. I understand, Wei. We will strike swiftly, decisively, and without mercy. The purge began at dawn. Soldiers led by Wei and Jian fanned out across the capital, arresting nobles, officials, and even members of the Imperial Guard who had been implicated in the conspiracy. The arrests were swift and efficient, the evidence overwhelming, the resistance minimal. The trials were held in the public square, the accused paraded before the people, their crimes laid bare for all to see. The people, initially shocked by the extent of the treachery, soon erupted in anger, their cries for justice echoing through the city streets. Lian, presiding over the trials, her face an impassive mask, listened to the evidence, weighed the arguments, and delivered her verdicts. Some were exiled, their wealth and titles stripped away. Others were imprisoned, their sentences harsh but just. And a few, the most dangerous and unrepentant, met a swift and brutal end. The purge was a bloody affair, but it was also a necessary one. It cleansed the court of corruption, solidified Leon's power, and sent a clear message to any who might be tempted to challenge her rule. And as the dust settled, a new era dawned, an era of justice, strength, and hope, an era forged in the fires of rebellion and the unwavering bond between a sister and her brother. The peace Leon had fought so hard for proved to be as fragile as a spider's silk in a hurricane. Just as the empire began to heal, to rebuild, to believe in a brighter future, the Xiongnu threat returned, more menacing than ever before. It started with whispers, rumors carried by traders and travelers, tales of a new Khan, a ruthless warlord who sought to unite the fractured tribes and unleash their fury upon the weakened empire. Then came the envoys, their faces grim, their words blunt. "The Khan demands the surrender of the empire," the lead envoy declared, his voice echoing in the tense silence of the council chambers. "He offers you a choice, Empress Leon. Submit and become his concubine or face annihilation." Leon, seated on her throne, her expression unreadable, listened to the envoy's ultimatum. A flicker of anger sparked in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, her years in the Xiongnu camp having taught her the value of controlling her emotions. "Tell your Khan," she said, her voice calm but firm, "that the Empress Leon does not surrender. Tell him that the empire will defend itself, with every ounce of its strength, with every drop of its blood." The envoys, their mission failed, departed with thinly veiled threats of a swift and brutal retribution. Lian, dismissing her counsel, turned to Wei, his presence a reassuring constant in the storm that was about to break. "It seems our peace was short-lived," she said, a wry smile playing on her lips. Wei, his expression grim, nodded. "The Xiongnu are a formidable enemy, Lian, but we are prepared, we will fight, and we will prevail." The war began with a series of lightning raids across the northern border. The Xiongnu, their numbers swelled by newly united tribes, attacked with a ferocity that caught the imperial forces off guard. Lian, however, had anticipated this tactic. She had spent the past months strengthening the border defenses, training new recruits, and stockpiling supplies. She had also studied the Xiongnu's tactics, their strengths and weaknesses, their patterns of attack. She countered their raids with swift and decisive counterattacks, using her knowledge of the terrain and her understanding of the Xiongnu mindset to her advantage. She employed guerrilla tactics, harassing their supply lines, ambushing their patrols, and disrupting their communications. She turned their own aggression against them, forcing them to expend their energy and resources on futile pursuits. The key battle took place on the plains of Zheng, a vast expanse of grassland that had witnessed countless clashes between the two empires. The Xiongnu, led by the new Khan, a towering figure clad in black armor, outnumbered the imperial forces 2-1. They charged across the plains, their war cries echoing across the battlefield, their horses' hooves thundering like a stampede. Lian, positioned on a small hill overlooking the battlefield, watched their advance with a calm detachment. She had anticipated this attack, this decisive confrontation that would determine the fate of the empire. She had prepared for it, planned for it, and now she was ready to execute her strategy. She had divided her forces into 3 contingents. The first, led by Jian, was positioned on the flanks, hidden in a thick grove of trees, their task to disrupt the enemy's charge and create confusion. The second, commanded by Wei, formed the center line, their shields interlocked, their spears pointed outward, a wall of steel that would meet the brunt of the Xiongnu attack. And the third, the smallest and most mobile, was under Lian's direct command, their role to exploit any weakness, to deliver the decisive blow. As the Xiongnu horde thundered towards them, Lian raised her hand, the signal for the first phase of her plan. Jian's forces emerged from their hiding place, unleashing a volley of arrows that rained down on the enemy flanks, causing chaos and disrupting their formation. The Xiongnu, caught off guard, faltered, their charge losing momentum. Wei's forces held their ground, their shields absorbing the impact of the remaining Xiongnu charge. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of steel and blood. But the Imperial line held firm, their discipline and training proving their worth. Lian, seeing the enemy's weakened center, seized the opportunity. She led her contingent in a swift, flanking maneuver, circling around the Xiongnu's rear, their horses' hooves silent on the soft grass. They emerged from the dust cloud, their swords flashing, their war cries echoing across the battlefield. The Xiongnu, caught between two fronts, their ranks broken, their morale shattered, began to falter. Lian, her sword a blur of motion, cut through their ranks, her leadership inspiring her troops, her presence a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos. The battle raged for hours, the outcome hanging in the balance. But in the end, Lian's strategic brilliance and her warriors' unwavering courage prevailed. The Xiongnu, their losses mounting, their Khan slain in a duel with Wei, were routed, their retreat turning into a panicked flight. Lian, her armor stained with blood, her face streaked with dust and sweat, surveyed the battlefield, the cost of victory weighing heavily on her heart. But she had done it. She had defended her empire, secured her throne, proven her worth as a leader and a warrior. The god of war had triumphed once again. The victory on the plains of Zhang was short-lived. News arrived with the setting sun, carried by a breathless scout, his face etched with fear. The Khan was not dead. He had been a decoy, a clever ruse to lure Lian into a false sense of security. The real Khan, Altan, a seasoned warrior and Wei's own uncle, had been leading a separate force, a force that was now bearing down on the imperial capital. A wave of exhaustion washed over Lian. Just when she thought the war was won, another battle loomed, a battle that threatened to undo everything she had fought for. But surrender was not an option. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let her empire fall now. "We will defend the capital," she declared, her voice ringing with a steely resolve that belied her weariness. "We will make our stand here, and we will prevail." The capital braced for siege. The city walls were reinforced, the defenses strengthened, the citizens mobilized. Lian, drawing on her years of experience in the Xiongnu camp, organized the defenses, assigning tasks, deploying troops, her mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations. Altan's army arrived like a storm, a vast horde of warriors that dwarfed even the force Lian had faced on the plains of Zhang. They surrounded the city, their siege engines pounding the walls, their archers raining down arrows, their warriors attempting to scale the defenses. The battle raged for days, a brutal, relentless struggle for survival. Lian, clad in her battle armor, her sword a constant companion, moved through the city, rallying her troops, inspiring her people, her presence a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. But the enemy was relentless. Altan, a cunning and ruthless leader, pressed his advantage, exploiting every weakness, probing every defense. He led his warriors in daring attacks, scaling the walls, breaching the gates, pushing deeper into the city. The tide turned when Altan himself joined the fray. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of destruction, his sword cleaving through imperial soldiers, his war cries echoing through the streets. He sought Lian out, his desire for vengeance burning in his eyes, his hatred for the woman who had defied him, who had stolen his nephew's loyalty, fueling his rage. Lian, recognizing the danger, met his challenge. They clashed in the heart of the city, their swords meeting in a shower of sparks, their battle cries echoing through the smoke-filled air. Lian, though skilled, was no match for Altan's raw power and experience. She fought defensively, parrying his blows, seeking an opening, a weakness to exploit. But Altan was relentless, his attacks growing fiercer, his determination to kill her unwavering. He cornered her in a narrow alleyway, his sword poised for the final strike. "It ends here, Empress," he snarled, his voice filled with triumph. Just as he lunged, a figure intercepted him, his sword deflecting Altan's blow. It was Wei, his face pale, his eyes filled with a conflict that mirrored Lian's own. "Uncle," he said, his voice strained, "stop this madness." Altan, surprised by his nephew's intervention, roared in anger. "Traitor!" he spat. "You side with the enemy against your own blood?" Wei, his gaze fixed on Lian, his heart aching with the impossible choice he had to make, shook his head. "I choose love over blood, uncle. I choose peace over war." He turned to face Altan, his sword raised. "I will not let you destroy her, nor will I let you destroy the empire she has built." The battle between uncle and nephew was a whirlwind of fury, a clash of loyalties, a dance of death under the blood-red sky. Lian, watching in horror, could only pray that Wei would survive, that their love would not be another casualty of this senseless war. In the end, it was Wei who emerged victorious. He struck Altan down, his sword piercing the Khan's heart, ending his reign of terror. But the victory came at a cost. The Xiongnu, witnessing their leader's death, their morale shattered, fell into chaos. They retreated from the capital, their invasion thwarted, their dreams of conquest shattered. Wei, his hands stained with his uncle's blood, his heart heavy with the burden of leadership, turned to Lian, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "It is done, Lian," he said, his voice hoarse. "The war is over." Lian, her body trembling with relief, rushed to him, her arms embracing him, her tears staining his armor. "Wei," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved us. You saved me." He held her close, his chin resting on her head, his warmth a comforting balm to her weary soul. "We saved each other, Lian," he said, his voice soft. "We chose love over duty, peace over war." In the aftermath of the battle, Wei, with the support of the remaining Xiongnu leaders, established himself as the new Khan. He honored his promise to Lian, forging a lasting peace between their empires, a peace built on mutual respect, shared prosperity, and the enduring power of their love. The war was over, but the real battle had just begun. Lian, standing amidst the rubble of the besieged capital, knew that securing her throne was only the first step. Now she had to rebuild, reform, and reshape the empire into the vision she had carried with her through years of exile and hardship. Her first act was one of healing. She ordered the construction of hospitals and shelters for the wounded and displaced, ensuring that those who had suffered the most from the war received immediate care and support. She opened the imperial granaries, distributing food and supplies to the people, alleviating the hardships caused by the disruption of trade and agriculture. Next, she turned her attention to her allies. Jian, her steadfast brother, was named her chief advisor, his wisdom and loyalty earning him a place of honor at her side. She granted him lands and titles, recognizing his invaluable contribution to her victory. She also rewarded the loyal ministers and generals who had supported her, elevating them to positions of power and influence, ensuring that her court was filled with those who shared her vision for a just and prosperous empire. The reforms she implemented were swift and far-reaching. She abolished the corrupt practices that had plagued the previous regime, establishing a system of checks and balances to prevent the abuse of power. She reformed the tax system, easing the burden on the common folk, while ensuring that the wealthy contributed their fair share. She invested in infrastructure, building roads, bridges, and irrigation systems, creating jobs and stimulating the economy. She also prioritized education, establishing schools and academies throughout the empire, opening up opportunities for all, regardless of social status or gender. She believed that knowledge was power, and she sought to empower her people, to create a society where everyone had the chance to reach their full potential. The Xiongnu, under Wei's leadership, proved to be valuable allies. They honored the peace treaty, their warriors patrolling the borders, ensuring the safety of the empire. Trade flourished between the two nations, bringing prosperity and cultural exchange. Lian even encouraged intermarriage between the Xiongnu and her own people, believing that such unions would strengthen the bonds of peace and create a more harmonious future. But Lian's reforms were not without opposition. There were those who clung to the old ways, who resented her changes, who saw her as a threat to their power and privilege. They whispered in the shadows, plotting against her, seeking to undermine her authority. Lian, however, was vigilant. She had learned to anticipate treachery, to recognize the signs of discontent. She had built a network of spies and informants, their eyes and ears throughout the empire, reporting on any whispers of rebellion, any plots against her rule. She dealt with these threats swiftly and decisively. She exposed the conspirators, brought them to justice, and crushed any attempts to destabilize her reign. She showed no mercy to those who sought to undermine the peace and prosperity she'd worked so hard to achieve. And as the years passed, Lian's rule became synonymous with stability, justice, and progress. The empire flourished under her guidance, its wounds healed, its strength renewed. The people, once wary, now embraced her as their leader, their protector, their empress. Lian, however, never forgot the sacrifices that had been made. The battles that had been fought, the price that had been paid for peace. She carried the scars of war, both physical and emotional, a constant reminder of the fragility of power, the ever-present threat of chaos. She ruled with a firm hand, but also with compassion and understanding. She listened to her advisors, sought the counsel of her people, and made decisions that were in the best interest of the empire, even if they were unpopular or difficult. And as she sat on her throne, the weight of the crown a familiar burden, she knew that her journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new threats, new battles to be fought. But she was ready. She was Lian, the god of war, the empress of the Phoenix, and she would continue to lead her people, to protect her empire, to forge a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The wedding was a spectacle unlike any the empire had ever seen. Lian, clad in crimson and gold, a phoenix embroidered on her flowing robes, stood beside Wei, his Xiongnu attire a stark contrast to the imperial finery. They were a picture of contrasts, the fiery empress and the stoic Khan, their union a symbol of the unlikely peace that had been forged between their peoples. "By the power vested in me," the court official proclaimed, his voice echoing through the grand hall, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Cheers erupted, a joyous cacophony that blended the languages and customs of two cultures. Lian, her eyes sparkling with a happiness she had never thought possible, met Wei's gaze, a silent promise exchanged between them. Their marriage was more than just a personal union. It was a political strategy, a bold move to solidify the peace and create a new, unified empire. Lian, with Wei's support, announced their intention to merge the two realms, creating a single, powerful entity that would stretch from the northern steppes to the southern seas. The challenges were immense. Centuries of mistrust and conflict had created deep divisions between the two cultures. There were those who resisted the merger, fearing the loss of their traditions, their identities, their power. Lian and Wei, however, were determined to overcome these obstacles. "We will build a new empire," Lian declared in a grand assembly, her voice ringing with conviction. "An empire where both Xiongnu and imperial citizens are equal, where our strengths complement each other, where our differences enrich us." She implemented policies that promoted integration and understanding. She encouraged trade and cultural exchange, established schools that taught both languages and histories, and created a joint council where representatives from both cultures could voice their concerns and contribute to the governance of the new empire. Wei, with his deep understanding of the Xiongnu people, proved to be an invaluable partner. He traveled throughout the empire, meeting with tribal leaders, addressing their concerns, and assuring them of Lian's commitment to their well-being. He also acted as a bridge between the two cultures, mediating disputes, fostering understanding, and building trust. The process was not without its difficulties. There were clashes, misunderstandings, and setbacks. But Lian and Wei, with their unwavering determination and their shared vision, navigated these challenges with patience and wisdom. "It's not easy," Lian admitted one evening, as she and Wei sat by the fire in their private chambers, the weight of the empire pressing down on them. "No," Wei agreed, his hand reaching out to clasp hers, "but it is worth it." He looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration and love. "You are doing something extraordinary, Lian. You are creating a legacy that will be remembered for generations to come." Lian, her heart warmed by his words, smiled. "We are doing it together, Wei, and that is what makes it truly special." Their reign was long and prosperous. The new empire, forged in the fires of war and united by the bonds of love, became a beacon of stability and progress. Trade flourished, cities grew, and the arts and sciences thrived. The people, once divided by suspicion and fear, now lived together in relative harmony, their differences celebrated, their strengths combined. Lian and Wei, the empress and the Khan, ruled side by side, their love a guiding light, their wisdom a source of strength. They faced challenges, overcame obstacles, and made difficult choices, but they always did so together, their bond unbreakable, their commitment to their people unwavering. And as the years turned into decades, their legacy grew, their names whispered in awe and respect throughout the land. They were the architects of a new era, the founders of a dynasty that would endure for centuries, a testament to the power of love, the strength of unity, and the enduring spirit of the human heart. Lian's reign stretched long and prosperous, her name echoing through the annals of history as the empress who united two warring empires. She was remembered as both liberator and conqueror, a ruler who had risen from the ashes of her own forgotten existence to forge a new destiny for her people. She was revered for her strength, her wisdom, her unwavering commitment to justice and peace. She was also feared, her reputation as the god of war preceding her, a reminder of the ruthless determination that had brought her to power. But Lian was more than just a warrior or a ruler. She was a woman of contradictions, a complex figure who had navigated the treacherous currents of power and love, sacrifice and ambition. She had been forged in the crucible of war, her spirit tempered by hardship, her heart softened by compassion. In her final days, as she sat in her palace gardens, surrounded by the beauty she had helped to create, she reflected on her journey. She had come a long way from the forgotten princess, the unwanted daughter, the sacrificial lamb. She had defied expectations, overcome obstacles, and achieved greatness. But she had also paid a price. The memories of the battles she had fought, the lives that had been lost, the sacrifices she had made, weighed heavily on her soul. The shadows of her past, the ghosts of those she had killed, haunted her dreams. Yet she had no regrets. She had done what she had to do for her people, for her empire, for the love that had sustained her through the darkest of times. As she closed her eyes, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, she saw a vision of the future. The empire she had built, strong and united, its people living in peace and prosperity. The legacy she'd forged, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to achieve greatness, to create a better world. And in the heart of that vision, she saw herself, not as the fearsome god of war, but as the woman she had always been. Lian, the forgotten princess, the warrior queen, the lover, the leader, the legend. Her story, a tale of resilience, transformation, and redemption, would be told and retold for generations to come, inspiring those who dared to dream of a better future, a future where peace and justice prevailed, where love conquered all, where the legacy of a forgotten princess lived on in the hearts of her people,